My name is Kasima. I am 32 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life paying for things I was never invited to enjoy. Last Friday evening, my phone buzzed on the granite counter of my Boston apartment. It was a message in our family group chat from my younger sister, Brittany. She wrote, "Don't come to the barbecue. Tyler says you will make the party stink." I stood there in the quiet of my kitchen and watched the screen. Within 10 seconds, my mother Brenda sent a laughing emoji. My father Gary sent a thumbs up. Nobody asked why. Nobody defended me. I was simply erased from the holiday weekend because my brother-in-law decided my presence ruined his aesthetic. I did not call them. I did not type out a paragraph explaining how much money I had given them over the years. I just typed one word: understood. But the next morning, the dynamics shifted in a way they never saw coming. Before I tell you what happened in that boardroom, let me welcome you to Grape Vengeance. If you are watching this and you are over 55, you probably know a thing or two about family members who mistake your kindness for weakness. Drop your age in the comments and let me know if you have ever had to cut a toxic relative out of your life. Make sure to subscribe because this story starts with a text message and ends with a federal compliance audit. Let me take you to Monday morning. Tyler is a tech executive. He runs a logistics startup that was bleeding cash, but he managed to secure a buyout offer from a major private equity firm. He thought he was untouchable. He even brought Brittany with him to the firm's downtown corporate headquarters to show off his big payday. I sat at the head of the conference table. The room was freezing, the way corporate boardrooms always are. I arranged my pens perfectly parallel to the legal pad. I was not there to take notes. I am the senior director of acquisitions. Tyler's buyout was my project. The heavy glass doors swung open. Tyler strode in first, adjusting his expensive silk tie. Brittany trailed behind him, holding a designer handbag that I knew for a fact was bought with a credit card I paid off last Christmas. Tyler looked toward the head of the table, expecting an older man in a gray suit. Instead, he saw me. He stopped walking. His leather shoes squeaked against the polished hardwood floor. Brittany bumped into his back, peeked around his shoulder, and froze. All the color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out for a few seconds. Then she pointed a shaking finger at me and screamed, "Why are you here? What did you do?" I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. I looked at the man who said I would make his party stink, and I slid a thick white binder across the table. I told them to close the door and take a seat. Tyler refused to pull out his leather chair. He planted his hands flat on the polished wood and leaned forward, attempting to loom over me. He told me to stop playing a prank. He demanded I call the real executive in charge of this acquisition so he could sign his paperwork and get back to his holiday weekend. I did not blink. I picked up my business card from the table and slid it across the surface until it stopped inches from his knuckles. He looked down. He read the embossed letters. Senior Director of Restructuring and Acquisitions. He read my name right above it. His shoulders dropped instantly. The arrogant posture melted away in a single second, leaving him staring at a piece of heavy cardstock like it was a live grenade. Brittany finally found her voice. She stepped around him and slammed her designer purse onto the table, rattling the crystal water pitchers. She told me to stop acting crazy. She reminded me in a shrill tone that we are sisters and this man is my family. She ordered me to explain what I was doing sitting in a corner office of a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. I folded my hands together, resting them on top of the white binder. I told her I was just doing my job. Then I looked at Tyler. I asked him if he still thought I would make his party stink. He swallowed hard. He looked at the acoustic ceiling tiles at the glass doors everywhere except my eyes. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He knew I had read the text message. 2 weeks ago, my sister sent me a link to a high-end patio website. It was a custom stainless steel outdoor kitchen setup, complete with a built-in smoker, a dual-zone wine fridge, and imported marble countertops. The total price tag was $5,000. She did not ask if I liked it. She did not ask if I could afford it. She told me to enter my credit card information for delivery before Labor Day. When I asked her why she thought I would buy her a $5,000 grill, she called me selfish. She said I was 32 years old, single, and lived in a downtown apartment. She claimed I had no real expenses, and it was my fundamental duty as the older sister with a corporate job to contribute to her new luxury lifestyle. She said a housewarming gift of that magnitude was expected from someone in my position. For the first time in a decade, I typed the word no. The fallout was swift and brutal. Brittany called our mother, crying hysterically. My mother called me 10 minutes later and told me I was ruining my sister's special milestone over a few pennies. I hung up the phone. I did not transfer any money. I did not apologize. That refusal was the real reason Tyler banned me from the barbecue. The message about me making the party stink was not a random insult thrown out in the heat of the moment. It was a calculated punishment. They wanted to exile me from the family celebration to teach me a lesson about obedience. They expected me to panic beg for forgiveness and buy the outdoor kitchen just to earn my invitation back to their yard. They treated my presence at a family gathering like a subscription service I had failed to renew. Sitting in that freezing boardroom watching my sister glare at me with pure entitlement, I realized this dynamic was not new. It was the exact same script our parents wrote for us growing up in the suburbs of Boston. Brittany was always the chosen one. She was delicate. She needed the best of everything to thrive in the world. When she turned 17, my father drove a brand new convertible into our driveway with a giant red bow on the hood. When I turned 17, my father handed me a laminated bus schedule and told me to figure out my own way to my after-school shift. My parents paid full tuition for Brittany to attend a private liberal arts college out of state. They paid for her dorm room, her premium meal plan, and her spring break trips to the islands. I stayed in Massachusetts. I worked 40 hours a week managing a local diner to pay for my classes at the state university. I lived in a damp basement apartment with 3 noisy roommates. Whenever I mentioned the financial difference, my mother would shake her head and sigh. She would tell me I was the resilient one. She said I could handle hardship, but Brittany was sensitive and needed more support. Resilient was just their code word for someone they did not want to spend money on. Over the last 10 years, I've built a career from nothing. I climbed the corporate ladder through sheer force of will. I made smart investments, and the moment I started making real money, my family suddenly remembered I existed. I became the silent teller machine for every emergency. When Brittany maxed out her credit cards during a girls' trip to Miami, my mother told me to pay the balance so my sister would not stress her heart. When Tyler crashed his car a month before their wedding, my father pressured me to cover the expensive insurance deductible. I paid every time. I paid because I thought buying their peace meant I was buying their love. I thought if I fixed their problems, they would eventually see my value as a human being. But the only value I had was my bank routing number. The moment I closed my wallet 2 weeks ago, I became garbage to them. I became a stink that needed to be kept away from their perfect new patio. Now they wanted to show off without me. The Labor Day barbecue was supposed to be Tyler's crowning achievement. He had bragged on social media for weeks about catering the event, hiring a professional bartender, and putting up expensive string lights across the lawn. He wanted all his new wealthy neighbors to see how successful he had become. He wanted to parade his beautiful wife around the yard and celebrate the upcoming corporate buyout that would make him a millionaire by 35. He thought he had outsmarted his struggling logistics startup. He thought he was walking into this corporate boardroom today to sign a final purchase agreement, shake hands with a clueless executive, and walk away rich. He had no idea that the private equity firm acquiring his company put me in charge of auditing his specific department. I looked away from Brittany and focused entirely on her husband. I told him the barbecue sounded like a wonderful event. I asked him how he planned to pay the caterers now that his gravy train had officially derailed. Tyler puffed out his chest. He tried to regain his footing by using a deep, authoritative voice. He said his personal finances were none of my business and demanded we stick to the corporate agenda. He told me to open the acquisition file, stop acting unprofessionally, and get the legal paperwork started immediately. He smirked, assuming I was forced to process his payout, regardless of our personal history, because of corporate obligations. I did not smile back. I reached out and opened the thick white binder sitting between us. The sound of the heavy pages turning echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. I told him we were sticking to the corporate agenda right now. I flipped to a specific tab highlighted in bright red ink. I turned the heavy binder around and pushed it toward his side of the long table. I told him I spent the entire holiday weekend running a forensic trace on his department's vendor invoices. I explained that when a private equity firm prepares to buy a logistics startup, we check every single outgoing payment. We do not just look at the bottom line totals, we look at the routing numbers. We trace the specific bank accounts receiving the company funds. Tyler looked down at the open page. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face. His hands started to shake uncontrollably. He tried to pull his arms back from the table, but he was frozen in place. Brittany leaned over to look at the paper. She frowned in confusion. She told me she did not understand what I was showing them. She demanded I stop talking in riddles and just explain the document. I looked right into my sister's eyes. I kept my voice perfectly level and quiet. I explained that her husband had been creating fake vendor accounts for the last 18 months. I told her the company funds were not going to software providers or shipping partners. The money was being routed directly into a private offshore account controlled by him. I pointed a single finger to the spreadsheet printed on the page. I told her the $5,000 outdoor kitchen she tried to make me buy was nothing compared to the $200,000 her husband had just stolen from his own investors. The silence in the boardroom became suffocating. The air felt incredibly heavy. Tyler could not speak a single word. His breathing turned shallow and rapid. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting to hit the jagged rocks below. Brittany stared at him, waiting for him to yell at me, waiting for him to call me a liar and defend their honor. But he said nothing. He just stared at the proof of his own federal crimes. I closed the binder with a sharp snap. I told them the acquisition was officially paused, and the legal team would be entering the room in 5 minutes. The polished brass handle of the boardroom door turned with a sharp click. Exactly 5 minutes had elapsed since I closed the financial dossier. Marcus walked in first. He is our chief of compliance, a man who has spent 30 years dismantling corrupt corporations. Right behind him were 2 senior litigators from our legal department. They wore dark gray suits and carried matching leather briefcases. They did not smile. They did not offer handshakes. They took their seats on the opposite side of the long mahogany table, forming a wall of authority between my side of the room and the 2 people sweating across from me. Tyler jumped to his feet the moment Marcus sat down. He smoothed the front of his tailored jacket, trying desperately to project confidence. He forced a wide, artificial grin and addressed Marcus by his first name, attempting to establish a friendly rapport. Tyler pointed a finger at me and told the legal team that this was all a massive misunderstanding. He claimed I was a disgruntled relative trying to sabotage his career over a minor family disagreement about a holiday party. He actually chuckled a high-pitched, nervous sound that echoed off the acoustic ceiling tiles. He insisted we put the paperwork away and grab an early lunch to smooth things over. Marcus did not laugh. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of printed emails and laid them flat on the table. He looked up at the tech executive and advised him to sit down immediately. The tone in his voice was not a request, it was an absolute directive. Tyler slowly lowered himself back into his leather chair. His artificial grin vanished. The air conditioning hummed in the background, but a bead of sweat formed at his temple and dripped down his jawline. I took control of the meeting. I kept my posture straight and my hands folded on the table. I informed the legal team that we had completed the forensic accounting trace on the target acquisition. I stated for the official record that we had uncovered 42 fraudulent vendor accounts registered to a shell company in Delaware. I explained that those accounts had been billing the startup for phantom software services over the past 18 months. I then slid a printed bank statement across the table. It showed the shell company transferring those exact funds into a private wealth management account. I looked directly at my brother-in-law. I told the room that the private wealth account was registered solely under his Social Security number. Tyler turned pale. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on a dock. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked into a pathetic wheeze. He looked at the printed bank statements, realizing that his brilliant scheme was nothing more than a digital breadcrumb trail that led our auditors right to his front door. He realized he was not the smartest guy in the room. He was just a thief who got caught. He tried to pivot his defense. He slammed his hand on the table and yelled that his chief financial officer had set up those accounts. He claimed he was framed by disgruntled employees jealous of his upcoming buyout. He told Marcus that anyone could have forged those digital signatures. I tapped my index finger against the dossier. I corrected him. I pointed out that the IP addresses used to authorize those phantom payments traced directly back to his personal home network. Furthermore, several of the largest unauthorized transfers were initiated from a mobile device registered to his exact cellular account. I told him we even matched the timestamps of the wire transfers to his social media posts, proving he was authorizing stolen funds while sitting in first class on a flight to Cabo San Lucas. There was nowhere left for him to run. The legal trap was locked tight. Brittany finally broke her silence. The reality of the situation crashed down on her shoulders, crushing her sense of entitlement. She looked at the bank statements on the table and then looked at her husband. Her eyes darted back and forth as the math clicked together in her head. She knew what his actual salary was supposed to be. She suddenly realized that the luxury vehicles in their driveway, the designer clothes in her closet, and the lavish backyard renovations were not the result of his business genius. Her entire lifestyle was funded by embezzled corporate cash. She turned toward me. The arrogant woman who had strutted into my office 20 minutes earlier was completely gone. Her shoulders slumped. Her hands shook violently as she reached across the table, trying to grab my sleeve. She used her childhood nickname for me, her voice trembling with rising panic. She begged me to stop the meeting. She pleaded with me to make the lawyers leave the room so we could handle this privately. She reminded me that we shared the same parents, that we grew up in the same house, and that she was my little sister. She promised she would cancel the barbecue and invite me over for a special dinner if I just deleted the files. I pulled my arm back, ensuring she could not touch my suit. I did not soften my expression. I looked at her with pure clinical detachment. I addressed her formally, calling her Mrs. Lawson. I told her that there is no family discount for corporate fraud. I explained that my fiduciary duty is to the investors of this firm, not to the woman who demanded I buy her an outdoor kitchen. Brittany gasped, as if I had thrown a glass of ice water in her face. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over her expensive makeup and leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. She turned to her husband and started hitting his shoulder, demanding to know if he really stole the money. Tyler flinched away from her, burying his face in his hands. He did not defend himself. He just sat there, a broken man, waiting for the hammer to fall. Marcus leaned forward and delivered the final blow. He informed Tyler that the acquisition offer was officially terminated, effective immediately. He stated that our firm was freezing all transition funds and notifying the Federal Compliance Board regarding the missing capital. He advised Tyler to retain criminal defense counsel by the end of the business day. I pressed a button on the intercom console sitting in the center of the table. I requested building security to come to the executive boardroom. Two large men in dark blue uniforms arrived less than a minute later. They stood by the open glass doors, their presence silent, but incredibly intimidating. I looked at the disgraced couple sitting across from me. I told them the meeting was over and they were no longer welcome on the premises. Tyler stood up on shaking legs. He did not bother fixing his tie. He looked small, defeated, and utterly pathetic. He walked toward the exit without making eye contact with anyone. Brittany scrambled to gather her belongings. She knocked over a water glass in her panic, spilling cold water all over her expensive leather handbag. She did not bother to wipe it off. She practically ran toward the door to catch up with her husband. As she crossed the threshold, she turned back to look at me one last time. Her face was twisted with a mixture of terror and intense hatred. She told me I was going to pay for doing this to her. She promised to tell our parents that I maliciously destroyed her life out of pure jealousy. I did not respond. I watched the security guards escort them down the long hallway. They had to walk past dozens of junior analyst secretaries and corporate vice presidents. Every single person in the office stopped what they were doing and watched the arrogant tech executive and his entitled wife get marched into the elevator like common trespassers. The humiliation was absolute and entirely public. I waited until the elevator doors closed. Marcus nodded at me, a silent gesture of professional respect, before gathering his documents and leaving the room with his legal team. I was left completely alone in the freezing boardroom. The silence felt incredibly satisfying. I took a deep breath, enjoying the clean scent of polished wood and fresh paper. I picked up my smartphone from the table and walked back toward my private office. I had barely crossed the threshold of my doorway when the screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I ignored it. 10 seconds later, my father called. I ignored that one too. By the time I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, I had 14 missed calls and 6 frantic text messages. The corporate execution was finished, but the family war had just begun. The people who spent my entire life taking my money and ignoring my feelings were about to demand I commit a federal crime to save their favorite daughter. My smartphone vibrated so intensely it began sliding across the smooth surface of my desk. The screen flashed bright with continuous notifications. I swiped the display and opened the family group chat. The very same digital thread that had been used to mock me and exile me from the holiday weekend was now a frantic, chaotic chain of commands. My mother sent 5 messages in rapid succession. She demanded I pick up the phone. She ordered me to stop playing games and act like an adult. My father chimed in immediately after her. He typed in all capital letters, commanding me to drive to their house in the suburbs right this second. He called the situation a trivial misunderstanding that required a quick, quiet fix before Monday morning. The hypocrisy felt thick enough to choke on. Just 24 hours prior, I was treated like an unwanted pest banished from their pristine backyard. Now, I was the sole focus of their attention. They did not ask how my morning went. They did not inquire about the serious legal peril Tyler had placed himself in. They only cared about protecting my sister and preserving the illusion of her perfect, wealthy lifestyle. I ignored the messages, closed my laptop, and placed it inside my leather tote. I took the elevator down to the parking garage, my mind replaying their frantic text bubbles. The 40-minute drive out to the suburbs gave me plenty of time to process their reaction. My parents lived in a spacious 4-bedroom colonial. Growing up in that house taught me a very specific, painful lesson about conditional affection. My sister always received the best they had to offer. She inhabited the large corner bedroom with the attached private bath. I was relegated to the cramped guest room next to the noisy laundry machines. Whenever I complained about the inequity, my father would fold his newspaper, give me a stern look, and tell me to build character. He claimed hardship would make me strong and independent. In reality, he just wanted to reserve all the family resources for his favorite child. I remembered my college graduation. I paid for my own cap and gown, using tips from my waitress job. That same week, they gifted Brittany a 10-day vacation to Europe just for finishing her sophomore year. They groomed me to expect nothing, while training her to expect everything. I pulled into their wide asphalt driveway. The scene outside signaled pure panic. Tyler's leased luxury SUV sat parked at an awkward crooked angle. One of the front tires rested heavily on my mother's manicured grass. He had clearly driven here in a blind rush, abandoning his usual careful demeanor. I pushed the heavy oak front door open and stepped into the foyer. The atmosphere inside the house felt thick and suffocating. Tyler paced back and forth across the expensive Persian rug in the living room. He ran his hands through his hair, destroying his carefully styled look. He muttered under his breath, glaring down at the hardwood floorboards as if searching for an escape hatch. Brittany sat curled up on the oversized white sectional sofa. She clutched a damp tissue against her nose, producing loud, theatrical sobs that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. My mother hovered over her, gently rubbing her shoulder. The moment I entered the room, Brenda stopped offering comfort and glared at me with pure disdain. My father stood near the stone fireplace. He crossed his arms over his chest, squared his shoulders, and tried to project the same intimidating authority he used on me when I was a teenager. He pointed a stern finger at one of the leather armchairs facing the sofa. He instructed me to sit down so we could straighten out this ridiculous mess I had created. I did not walk toward the chair. I stood firmly near the entryway, keeping my distance. I told him I preferred to stand. Gary scoffed. He dropped his arms and took a deliberate step toward me, trying to use his height to force my compliance. He demanded I log back into my corporate server from my phone and alter the preliminary audit report. He spoke as if he were asking me to change a simple typo on a high school essay. He insisted that I erase the missing funds from the official ledger, approve the acquisition deal, and let his son-in-law keep his prestigious job. He actually referred to the stolen corporate cash as a tiny accounting error that a smart girl like me could easily brush under the rug. My mother abandoned her post on the sofa and marched toward me. She reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly tight, her fingernails digging into my skin. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her eyes held a cold, calculating edge. She asked how I could dare destroy my own sister's marriage over a few numbers on a screen. She accused me of letting petty professional pride ruin our family. She claimed Tyler was a wonderful provider who just made a small mistake under immense pressure to succeed. I pulled my wrist out of her grasp. I looked from her tear-stained face to the man pacing the rug and finally down to my sister on the couch. I addressed the room with a calm, even tone, refusing to match their hysterical energy. I pointed out the undeniable irony of their demands. I reminded them that yesterday they gleefully uninvited me from a holiday gathering because I was deemed unworthy to stand on their new patio. I noted that the barbecue, the imported marble countertops, the premium caterers, and the luxury vehicles parked outside were all purchased with stolen cash. I stated clearly that they threw me away like garbage when I refused to fund their lifestyle, yet now they expected me to risk my career and face federal prison to sweep grand larceny out of sight. Brittany stopped crying. She lowered the crumpled tissue and stared at me with pure venom. Her sadness evaporated, replaced by the same toxic entitlement she had displayed her entire life. She told our parents that I was enjoying this tragedy. She shrieked that I was a bitter, jealous spinster, punishing her for finding a rich husband and living a life I could never achieve. Gary stepped right in front of me, invading my personal space. The scent of his stale coffee and strong cologne washed over me. His face turned a deep shade of crimson. He abandoned the tough boss routine and pulled out his ultimate weapon, the one tactic he believed would always bring me to my knees. He laid down a unified threat. He told me I had two choices. I could drive back to the city, fix the paperwork, and save my brother-in-law from ruin, or I could walk out his front door and consider myself an orphan. He declared that if I submitted the real numbers to the compliance board, I would be permanently disowned. He swore I would be cut out of the will, erased from their lives, and never welcomed back into their home. I looked at the three of them standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to cast me out just to protect a thief. The threat of losing their love used to paralyze me. Today it felt like someone unlocking a cage. I turned around and walked out into the afternoon sun without saying another word. I needed to get back to my office to finalize the paperwork. I did not care about being disowned anymore. But as I drove back to the city and began digging deeper into Tyler's loan applications, I uncovered a hidden secret buried inside the ledgers. A secret that proved my parents did not just want to save Tyler's pride. They were hiding something terrifying about their own financial survival, and I was holding the match that would burn it all down. I navigated the evening traffic on the Massachusetts Turnpike in total silence. The radio remained off. The city skyline emerged in the distance, a grid of illuminated glass and steel that represented the only sanctuary I truly trusted. My corporate building stood tall against the fading dusk. I swiped my security badge at the private garage entrance and took the express elevator straight to the executive floor. The office was mostly empty by 6 o'clock. The quiet hum of the ventilation system provided a steady backdrop as I walked down the carpeted hallway and locked my suite door from the inside. I dropped my leather tote onto the side chair and woke up my dual desktop monitors. The bright white light flooded my workspace. My mandate from the compliance committee was clear. I needed to finalize the preliminary findings and submit the official dossier to the federal regulatory boards before the morning bell. I opened Tyler's digital acquisition file. I had already proven he embezzled corporate cash, but something about his behavior back at the suburban house gnawed at my professional instincts. His panic felt too deep. A man caught stealing from his employer usually displays anger or attempts to negotiate a severance. Tyler looked like a man running out of oxygen. I suspected his financial decay reached much further than phantom software invoices. Using my highest security clearance, I accessed our firm's proprietary background investigation software. I bypassed the standard internal ledgers and ran a comprehensive sweep of his external credit liabilities. I wanted to see the entire structural foundation of his supposed wealth. The progress bar crawled across my screen. When the encrypted results populated, a dense web of financial distress unspooled right in front of my eyes. Tyler was drowning. Long before he began skimming capital from his startup, he had maxed out every traditional line of credit available to him. His personal credit cards carried staggering balances. He had taken out multiple high-interest payday advances. The luxury lifestyle he paraded in front of his wealthy neighbors was a fragile house of cards held together by extreme debt. But the most alarming discovery sat buried at the bottom of the liability report. I clicked on a hyperlinked document labeled as a commercial bridge loan. The file downloaded as a scanned PDF. I zoomed in on the first page. The principal amount listed was $400,000. The interest rate was predatory, structured to extract maximum penalties upon any default. Tyler had secured this private financing 14 months ago, likely to keep his failing logistics company afloat just long enough to trick a buyer into an acquisition. I scrolled to the second page to examine the terms. A loan of that magnitude, issued to a high-risk borrower, requires substantial backing. The lender demanded hard assets. I scrolled to the third page to review the collateral registry. My breath caught in my throat. I stopped scrolling. The address listed under the seized asset clause was not a commercial warehouse or a piece of industrial equipment. It was a residential property. I recognized the street number. I recognized the zip code. It was the 4-bedroom colonial where I grew up. My hand felt heavy as I dragged the mouse down to the final page of the contract. The glow of the monitor illuminated the black ink signatures. Tyler had signed on the primary borrower line. Right below his name were 2 additional signatures acting as unconditional personal guarantors. Brenda Wright. Gary Wright. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. The leather creaked in the silent office. Suddenly, the frantic, hysterical scene in that living room snapped into sharp focus. The puzzle pieces locked together with devastating clarity. My parents were not just trying to protect my sister's lavish aesthetic. They were fighting for their own survival. The red face, the clawing grip on my wrist, the extreme threats of disownment, none of that was born out of loyalty to their son-in-law. It was raw, unadulterated terror. They had taken the deed to their fully paid-off home, the house they had owned free and clear for 10 years, and signed it over to a predatory commercial lender to fund Tyler's illusion. If Tyler defaulted on his payments, the bank would not negotiate. The lender would trigger the seizure clause, foreclose on the property, and liquidate the asset to recover their cash. I sat alone in the darkening office and absorbed the profound cruelty of their decision. When I was 19 years old, I begged my father to co-sign a modest student loan so I could afford my college textbooks without taking on a third part-time job. He flatly refused. He stood in that exact same living room and told me that putting his name on my debt was a foolish financial risk. He claimed a responsible adult never gambles their security on someone else. I spent the next 3 years surviving on ramen noodles and working graveyard shifts at a diner to fund my own education. Yet when their golden child married a flashy tech executive, they eagerly pledged their life savings and the roof over their heads to sponsor his fraudulent ambitions. They gambled their entire retirement on the man who banned me from his backyard barbecue. The moral weight of my next action pressed down on my shoulders. I was holding the detonator to my family's existence. If I finalized the audit and transmitted the file to the compliance board, the corporate machinery would take over. The legal team would formally press charges by tomorrow afternoon. Tyler's remaining assets would be immediately frozen by federal authorities. He would miss his upcoming commercial loan payment. The private lender would issue a notice of default. Within 90 days, my parents would receive an eviction notice. They would lose their home, their equity, and their financial dignity. I stood up and paced the length of my office. The city lights sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering no answers. Society dictates that blood is thicker than water. The unwritten rules of family demand that you protect your parents at all costs, even when they have treated you like an unwanted burden. They expected me to fall in line. They expected me to alter the corporate ledger, commit a felony, and bury the embezzlement to keep them safe. I walked over to the break room down the hall, poured a cup of stale black coffee, and returned to my desk. I set the mug down and placed my hands on the keyboard. I am an auditor. My profession relies on the cold, hard truth of mathematics. Numbers do not lie, and they do not care about family loyalty. I opened the federal compliance portal on my secondary monitor. I began attaching the digital evidence one file at a time. I uploaded the phantom vendor invoices. I attached the offshore routing numbers. Finally, I uploaded the signed commercial bridge loan containing my parents' signatures, proving the full scope of the financial entanglement. I drafted the executive summary. I outlined the exact timeline of the theft and the specific mechanisms used to drain the corporate accounts. My fingers flew across the keys, translating a messy family tragedy into a sterile legal document. I reviewed every sentence to ensure unquestionable accuracy. I checked every decimal point. The digital submission button glowed blue at the bottom of the screen. Hovering my cursor over that button felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. Pressing down on the mouse would permanently sever my ties to my bloodline. It would transform me from a disregarded daughter into the architect of their ruin. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering a steady rhythm against my ribs. I knew they despised me. I knew they would never forgive me. I had to decide if I was willing to be the villain in their story to uphold my own integrity. I gripped the mouse. My index finger rested on the left click button. I closed my eyes, ready to finalize the destruction of Tyler's empire. But before I could apply the necessary pressure to execute the command, the heavy glass door of my office suite rattled violently from the outside corridor. Someone was trying to force their way in. I released my grip on the mouse and spun my chair toward the hallway. The frosted glass door of my suite shook again. A muffled voice called out, announcing the night maintenance crew. My tense muscles relaxed. The janitor unlocked the entrance, dragging a rolling trash bin across the threshold. I realized I was running on pure adrenaline. I needed a clear head before executing a decision of this magnitude. I saved the encrypted dossier to my secure cloud drive, logged off the terminal, and packed my briefcase. I decided to pull the trigger from the safety of my own living room. I drove back to my residential high-rise in the Back Bay. The evening air felt crisp against my face as I walked from the parking garage into the grand lobby. I nodded to the night doorman, who was distracted by a heated dispute with a food delivery driver. I swiped my access fob, stepped into the private elevator, and rode up to the 14th floor. The doors slid open to the plush carpet of my quiet corridor. I walked toward my unit and reached into my coat pocket for my keys. A shadow detached itself from the dark alcove near the emergency stairwell. Brittany stepped into the overhead light. She looked entirely feral. The flawless salon blowout she sported that morning was a tangled, frizzy mess. Her expensive mascara was smeared down her cheeks, and she wore the same designer clothes, now wrinkled and stained with dried tears. Before I could process how she bypassed the lobby security desk, she lunged forward. She shoved her entire body weight against my shoulder just as I pushed my front door open. The sudden momentum forced us both into my entryway. I stumbled backward, dropping my leather briefcase onto the hardwood floor. Brittany kicked the heavy door shut behind us. She did not offer a single word of apology for the corporate fraud. She did not express an ounce of remorse for the immense danger she put our parents in. Instead, she went strictly on the offensive. She pointed a trembling finger at my chest and unleashed a torrent of vicious insults. She accused me of plotting this entire audit just to ruin her perfect life. She claimed I was a bitter, lonely woman who could not stand the sight of a happy marriage. She yelled that I was projecting my own pathetic romantic failures onto her successful husband. I listened to her scream. I analyzed her frantic posture. She acted like a cornered animal, lashing out at the nearest target. She told me I had always been envious of her beauty, her natural charm, and her elite social circle. She said I spent my whole life hiding behind sterile spreadsheets because I was fundamentally unlovable. She actually believed that exposing a federal financial crime was just a petty act of sibling rivalry. Her delusion ran so deep, it bordered on terrifying. She paced back and forth across my foyer, her high heels clicking sharply against the wood. She stopped abruptly and crossed her arms. Her tone shifted from hysterical anger to cold command. She informed me that she knew I had seen the commercial bridge loan files. She knew I understood the collateral terms involving our childhood home. Then she delivered her extortion demand. She ordered me to write a certified check for $400,000 by tomorrow morning. She instructed me to liquidate my personal investment portfolios, drain my savings accounts, and wire the funds directly to the private lender. She justified this outrageous demand by claiming it was my ultimate duty to rescue our parents from homelessness. She said I was wealthy single and had no real financial obligations to worry about. She spoke as if my bank accounts were a communal family trust fund that she had the authority to tap into whenever she pleased. She wanted me to hand over the money I earned through years of grueling corporate labor to quietly pay off a loan secured by a thief. I stood my ground. I looked at the woman who had treated me like a peasant her entire life. I kept my voice incredibly low and steady. I told her I would not spend a single dime of my hard-earned money to bail out a criminal. I stated that her husband signed those legal documents, our parents enabled his endless greed, and they would all face the consequences together. I told her the Bank of Cosima was permanently closed. The rejection hit her like a physical blow. Her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She let out a guttural shriek, spun around, and grabbed the heavy ceramic vase resting on my entryway console table. She lifted the expensive piece of pottery high above her head and hurled it directly at my face. I ducked hard to the right. The vase flew past my shoulder and crashed into the custom mirror hanging on the opposite wall. The impact sounded like a bomb detonating inside the small space. Shards of broken glass and sharp ceramic sprayed across the expensive rug, settling in a dangerous perimeter around my leather boots. She stood there, panting heavily, her chest heaving. She expected me to scream cry or strike her back. She wanted a chaotic street fight to validate her hysteria. I gave her nothing. I utilized the exact same emotional detachment I bring to a hostile corporate restructuring. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I stepped carefully over a jagged piece of the shattered mirror. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and dialed the front desk. The night manager answered on the second ring. I instructed him to send 2 security officers to my unit right away to remove an aggressive trespasser. I also told him to prepare an official incident report for the local police precinct regarding willful property damage. Brittany's jaw dropped open. The reality of my cold response short-circuited her brain. She stammered, insisting I could not call the authorities on my own flesh and blood. I ended the call and placed the phone back in my pocket. I looked at the broken glass on the floor. I told her she lost the right to use the title of sister the moment she hurled a weapon at my head. Less than 2 minutes later, a heavy knock echoed against my door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled it open. 2 uniformed building guards stepped into the foyer. They assessed the broken glass, noted my calm demeanor, and immediately flanked my sister. They grabbed her by the arms. She fought back, kicking her heels against the floorboards and screaming my name. She yelled that I was sending our parents to the streets to die. She cursed me, spitting venom as the guards dragged her out into the hallway and forced her toward the service elevator. Her frantic shrieks faded as the heavy steel doors slid shut. I closed my front door and locked the deadbolt. I stood alone in the wreckage of my entryway. Staring at the broken shards reflecting the harsh overhead lights, I felt the final frayed thread of familial obligation snap in half. The guilt that had weighed me down for years evaporated. I realized a profound truth. You cannot rescue people who demand you bleed just to keep them warm. They would drain every drop of my resources, ruin my career, and then step over my empty shell without a second thought. I walked past the mess, headed straight for my home office, and prepared to finish what I started. Tuesday morning arrived with gray skies and a biting wind blowing off the harbor. I woke up after 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. It was the deepest rest I had experienced in 10 years. The crushing weight of trying to please my relatives had vanished during the night, replaced by a cold and sharp focus. I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, pinned my security badge to my lapel, and took a car to the financial district. The ride was entirely quiet. I held my encrypted company tablet resting on my lap. The final regulatory report sat waiting in the outbox, needing only one final review before transmission to the federal oversight committees. I pushed through the revolving glass doors of my office building at 8 o'clock sharp. The head concierge stepped out from behind his marble desk and flagged me down before I could reach the private elevator banks. He pointed toward the guest waiting area located near the front windows. Sitting on a velvet bench looking entirely out of place among the rushing investment bankers and corporate attorneys were my mother and father. Gary wore a stiff suit he normally saved for weddings and funerals. The fabric looked dated under the modern lighting. Brenda clutched her leather purse against her chest like a protective shield. Her knuckles were white from gripping the straps so hard. They had driven into the city during rush-hour traffic to stage an intervention. My father stood up the moment he spotted me walking across the floor. He puffed out his chest, attempting to command the vast corporate lobby the exact same way he commanded our suburban living room. He barked my name across the room, ordering me to stop walking. I did not let them pass the security turnstiles. I informed the concierge these guests did not have clearance for the upper executive levels. I turned to my parents and instructed them to follow me to the busy espresso bar located near the street entrance. I wanted witnesses. I wanted a highly public setting where they could not resort to throwing pottery or screaming. We claimed a small circular table tucked into the far corner. The cafe hummed with the loud noise of grinding espresso machines and morning business meetings. My parents sat close together on the curved booth seat. I took the single metal chair positioned opposite them. A barista brought over 3 black coffees. Nobody reached for a cup. Gary did not waste time with pleasantries or greetings. He reached inside his breast pocket and produced a folded piece of thick paper. He slapped it down onto the cafe table and slid it toward my hands. I looked down at the document. It was a hastily typed memorandum. The header falsely displayed my specific corporate department logo. I read the short paragraphs. The text was a fabrication. It stated that the forensic accounting trace yielded 0 irregularities. It officially cleared Tyler of all suspicion and recommended the immediate release of his buyout funds. At the bottom of the page was a solid black line waiting for my official signature. My father reached into his pocket a second time and pulled out a gold pen. He uncapped it and placed it right next to the fraudulent memo. He leaned across the table, invading my space. His voice dropped to a low and menacing whisper. He told me to sign the paper right now. He ordered me to walk upstairs, file this clean version into the company database, and end this nightmare. He spoke with supreme confidence, truly believing his parental authority could override federal laws. I looked at the crude forgery. It was insulting to my intelligence. Tyler had clearly typed it up in a panic during the middle of the night. Gary was demanding I commit corporate perjury, risk my professional license, and face potential jail time just to save a man who stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from his investors. When I did not immediately pick up the gold pen, Brenda leaned forward. She tried to soften his harsh approach by using her maternal tone. She told me our family had suffered enough over the last 24 hours. She claimed my sister was inconsolable, unable to sleep, and required heavy sedation just to stop crying. She begged me to be the bigger person, to put the past behind us and fix the problem. I stared at her, marveling at the profound depth of her delusion. I asked her why she was prioritizing a known thief over her own daughter. I asked her why saving a fraudster was more important than protecting my freedom. Gary lost his patience. He slammed his fist onto the cafe table, causing the coffee cups to rattle against their saucers. The sudden noise drew stares from a nearby table of young analysts, but my father did not care about the audience. He delivered his final ultimatum. He pointed a thick finger directly at my face. He declared that if I did not sign that paper right this second, I was dead to them. He explicitly stated that I would be stripped of my inheritance. He threatened to call his estate lawyer by noon to cut me out of the family trust entirely. He vowed that I would never receive a single penny of their wealth, and I would never be allowed to attend another holiday birthday or gathering for the rest of my life. He sat back against the booth, crossing his arms over his chest, looking incredibly satisfied. He thought the threat of losing his money would bring me to my knees. He believed financial leverage was the ultimate trump card. I sat in the metal chair and absorbed his words. I looked at the parents who laughed at a text message calling me garbage just days ago. I thought about the secret commercial bridge loans sitting inside my encrypted files. Gary was threatening to withhold an inheritance that no longer existed. He was threatening to banish me from a home that was about to be seized by a ruthless commercial bank. His ultimate weapon was a phantom. His wealth was an illusion. I felt a deep and authentic smile spread across my face. The sheer absurdity of their arrogance washed over me like a warm breeze. I reached out and touched the cold metal of the gold pen. My father smirked, assuming I was surrendering to his demands. Instead of signing his forged document, I picked up the paper, folded it in half, and slid it right back across the table. I looked Gary directly in the eyes. I kept my voice perfectly level, ensuring he heard every single syllable over the noise of the busy espresso machines. I told him the price of his family membership is far too high. I unzipped my leather tote and pulled out my encrypted company tablet. I placed the device on the table right next to my untouched coffee cup. I woke up the screen using my fingerprint scanner. The federal compliance portal was already loaded and waiting. The official forensic dossier, complete with Tyler's offshore routing numbers, the fake vendor receipts, and the signed commercial loan documents, sat on the bright display. The blue submission button pulsed at the bottom of the screen, requiring just one tap to execute the command. Brenda noticed the official government seal glowing on my tablet. She gasped, grabbing my father's arm with both hands. Her fake maternal warmth vanished, replaced by genuine terror. She realized I was not playing a game. I did not hesitate. I did not blink. Right there at the cafe table, while looking directly into my father's angry eyes, I pressed my index finger against the blue button. The screen transitioned instantly to a bright green confirmation page. A digital timestamp appeared in the center of the display. The files were permanently transmitted to the Federal Oversight Committees and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The corporate machine was officially activated. There was no recalling the transmission. The legal gears began turning the exact second the screen flashed green. My parents sat completely frozen in the booth. Their mouths hung open in silent shock. They watched a lifetime of control evaporate in front of their faces. They realized their threats held zero power over my actions. I locked my tablet and placed it back into my bag. I reached into my wallet, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and laid it neatly on top of the forged memo to cover the cost of the beverages. I stood up, pushed my metal chair in, and turned toward the elevator banks. I did not say goodbye. I did not look back. I left them sitting speechless in the crowded lobby, surrounded by strangers holding a useless piece of paper and a threat they could never execute. I stepped into the private elevator, leaving the busy coffee shop behind. The stainless steel doors slid shut, cutting off the view of my parents, staring blankly at their empty table. My focus shifted entirely to the machinery I had just activated. Once a financial report enters the Federal Compliance Network, human emotion is removed from the equation. The gears of justice grind forward without hesitation, and no amount of suburban guilt can stop them. 2 days passed in a blur of closed-door meetings and secure conference calls. Our private equity firm did not abandon the logistics startup buyout. We simply amputated the infected limb. My department worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and cold takeout, to draft a revised purchase agreement. We bypassed the executive suite entirely. The legal team neutralized Tyler's unvested shares with surgical precision. His lucrative golden parachute was slashed to zero. The millions he thought he was going to receive vanished into the ether, replaced by looming legal bills. Tyler had spent 5 years cultivating an image of a tech visionary. He leased high-end vehicles, and bought custom suits on credit to convince real investors he was a winner. He used the company checking account as his personal piggy bank, believing his own marketing pitch. He thought projecting wealth was the same thing as earning it. He built a fortress out of sand, and my audit was the rising tide. Now the math caught up with the marketing. Thursday morning arrived, with a heavy downpour outside the city windows. Our chief of compliance summoned the disgraced executive to the 12th floor. I did not sit at the negotiating table this time. I stood in the adjacent corridor, watching the proceedings unfold through the soundproof glass partition of the main meeting space. It was like watching a silent movie of a man's destruction. 2 federal regulators sat across from him, flanked by corporate security personnel. The room was sterile, devoid of warmth. The regulators placed a thick stack of printed wire transfers on the polished mahogany surface. Through the glass, I watched Tyler's posture collapse. The custom-tailored jacket suddenly seemed to swallow his frame. He ran a trembling hand over his face, wiping away beads of sweat. He tried to point fingers, his mouth moving in frantic bursts of denial. But the regulators just pushed the bank statements closer to his chest. There was no charm left, no smug smirk, just a trapped thief facing irrefutable ledgers. He gestured wildly, pleading his case to men who only cared about numbers. The head of human resources entered the space, holding a standard brown cardboard box. She placed it on the table right in front of him. The symbolism was universal. Tyler's tenure was officially over. She slid the termination papers toward his hands. He stared at the ink pen for a long moment. His shoulders shook. He signed his name with a rigid wrist. He was formally terminated, stripped of his stock options, and stripped of his dignity. The security guards flanked him. One officer handed him the cardboard box containing a few personal items cleared from his desk. A framed photo of his pristine backyard, a coffee mug, a decorative paperweight. The double doors opened. The walk from the meeting space to the main elevator bank took 60 seconds. It must have felt like a lifetime to him. The corporate floor was silent, but everyone was watching. Junior analysts peeked over their dual monitors. Secretaries paused their typing. The grapevine had already hummed with the news of the embezzlement scheme. The company directory had already been updated, his name erased from the system before he even reached the lobby. The facade of the brilliant entrepreneur shattered right there on the woven carpet. I watched him wait for the elevator doors to open. He clutched the cheap cardboard box against his chest. He did not look up. He did not make eye contact with the dozens of employees witnessing his exit. The doors opened, he stepped inside, and he disappeared from the building forever. By Friday afternoon, the firm officially filed a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen capital. The money train derailed permanently. The flow of stolen cash that funded my sister's lavish backyard renovations, designer handbags, and country club memberships was choked off at the source. There would be no more premium caterers. There would be no more imported marble countertops. The grand illusion was over. My phone vibrated on my desk, buzzing against a stack of clean audit reports. A text message appeared from an unknown number. It was Tyler. The grammar was sloppy, driven by panic and rage. He typed that I destroyed his future. He claimed I was a monster who ruined a beautiful family out of pure spite. Another text popped up a second later. He blamed me for his impending bankruptcy, stating that blood should protect blood. He wrote that my sister was crying on the kitchen floor, and it was all my fault. A third message followed, promising to sue me for defamation. A hollow threat from a man with frozen bank accounts and a ruined reputation. I read the words, searching for any flicker of guilt inside my chest. There was none. I did not type a witty comeback. I did not defend my actions or try to reason with a cornered thief. I tapped the screen twice and blocked the number. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and took a deep breath. The silence that followed was profound. Watching a bully face undeniable, legally binding consequences provided a deep, quiet satisfaction. For years he had used his artificial wealth to belittle me. He treated me like a peasant who was lucky to step on his patio. He banned me from a holiday gathering to stroke his own ego. Now the federal government was auditing his entire existence, tearing apart his life line by line. But the calm was temporary, a brief eye in the storm. Stripping Tyler of his income meant the private commercial lender would not receive their scheduled monthly payment. The dominoes were falling toward the suburbs, picking up speed. My parents had co-signed a staggering commercial loan, using their home as collateral. The bank would soon issue a notice of default, and I knew my mother and father would not surrender their property without a fight. They still believed they held the ultimate trump card over my life. They thought the promise of an inheritance could force me back into submission. They were preparing to drop the hammer, ready to draft a legal document designed to break my heart and force my compliance. They were about to learn that their greatest weapon was just another empty threat, and the wealth they dangled over my head was already a toxic asset. 2 weeks after the corporate security team marched my brother-in-law out of the building, a courier arrived at the reception desk on my floor. He carried a rigid cardboard envelope requiring a direct signature. The receptionist buzzed my intercom. I walked out to the lobby, signed the digital pad, and carried the parcel back to my desk. The return address belonged to a strip mall law firm located next to a discount grocery store in the suburbs. My mother had finally made her move. I sliced the envelope open with a steel letter opener. Inside rested 3 pages of cheap printer paper stapled together at the top left corner. It was a formal declaration of disinheritance. The legal phrasing was clumsy, clearly drafted by an attorney who charged a flat fee of $200. The document stated that Gary and Brenda Wright were revoking my status as a beneficiary to their estate. Every asset, every savings account, and the deed to the suburban colonial were now bequeathed solely to Brittany. They added a personal cover letter. My mother wrote the note by hand using thick blue ink. She stated that my betrayal was unforgivable. She claimed I chose a sterile corporate ledger over my own flesh and blood. She declared that since I acted with such independence, I no longer required their financial support or their legacy. The letter was designed to inflict a deep emotional wound. They expected me to read those words, collapse into tears, and realize the true cost of my defiance. They thought cutting me off from their imaginary fortune would force a desperate apology. I read the handwritten note twice. My pulse remained perfectly steady. My hands did not shake. The emotional hostage tactic they relied on for 3 decades failed to register even a blip of anxiety in my chest. Instead of feeling rejected, I felt a wave of cold amusement wash over me. My parents operated under a severe delusion regarding their wealth. They bought their 4-bedroom house 30 years ago when real estate was cheap. They viewed that property as a royal castle, a grand prize they could dangle over their children to ensure strict obedience. Growing up, any minor infraction resulted in my father threatening to kick me out and leave me with nothing. If I argued about doing chores while Brittany went to the mall, he reminded me who owned the roof over my head. They wielded their net worth like a heavy club, but they failed to comprehend the current reality of their financial situation. They lived in a fantasy where their assets were untouchable. They forgot that I was a senior restructuring director. I analyze distressed assets for a living. I dissect failing portfolios and calculate exact liabilities. I placed their disinheritance letter inside my leather bag and left the office for an early lunch. I did not go to a restaurant. I walked 3 blocks down the street to a towering glass skyscraper housing an elite private wealth management firm. My personal financial planner, David, managed my investment accounts. I sat in his plush waiting area for barely 2 minutes before he escorted me into his corner office overlooking the harbor. I handed David the cheap legal document. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the pages, and let out a short, dismissive scoff. He asked if my parents were attempting a bizarre practical joke. I told him they were entirely serious. I then pulled out my encrypted tablet and opened the secured files I retained from the audit. I displayed the commercial bridge loan my parents co-signed for my brother-in-law 14 months ago. I showed David the specific clauses tying the suburban colonial to the fraudulent debt. David leaned over his large mahogany desk, tracing the numbers with his pen. We ran the calculations together. The math was brutally transparent. The primary startup accounts belonging to Tyler were frozen by federal regulators. His income was zero. He had missed the initial payment on the commercial note. The private lender had already triggered the default sequence. The principal balance stood at $400,000, accumulating a predatory penalty rate every single day the account remained delinquent. We cross-referenced the current market value of my parents' house. The property required a new roof, updated plumbing, and modern appliances. Even if they managed to sell it in pristine condition, the maximum appraisal fell short of the outstanding commercial debt. Their equity was erased. The house was severely underwater. But the financial carnage did not stop at the property line. The guarantor agreement they signed gave the private lender sweeping rights to seize all available capital to satisfy the deficiency. That meant my father's retirement accounts, my mother's modest pension, and their joint savings were exposed. The bank would drain every liquid asset they possessed. David slid the tablet back toward my hands. He looked at me with a grim expression. He stated that my parents were not leaving an inheritance. They were bequeathing a toxic liability. The estate they just proudly handed over to my sister was a financial black hole. I thanked David for his time and walked out of his office and returned to my desk. The false power my parents tried to exert felt pathetic. They tried to execute me with an unloaded weapon. They wanted me to mourn the loss of a kingdom that was burning to the ground. I decided to send them the ashes. I accessed the county recorder database. Using my professional credentials, I pulled the official public records linked to their address. The private commercial lender had wasted no time. A formal bank lien was already filed and attached to the deed of the suburban house. The document proved the property was legally encumbered, serving as collateral for a defaulted loan. I printed the official lien on heavy stock paper. I retrieved a bright yellow highlighter from my desk drawer. I drew a thick neon line across the total debt amount. I highlighted the negative equity calculation. I made sure the catastrophic numbers stood out against the black and white text. I reached for a pad of small sticky notes. I did not write a long emotional response. I did not explain how their manipulation tactics were useless. I did not mention the pending criminal charges or the impending ruin facing my sister. I wrote 2 words in neat, precise print. Keep it. I pressed the sticky note onto the center of the highlighted bank lien. I took their original handwritten letter, the clumsy disinheritance document, and my printed response, sliding all the pages into a stiff mailer. I walked down to the corporate shipping center on the ground floor. I paid for overnight certified delivery. I wanted them to sign for the package. I wanted proof that the reality check reached their hands. The tracking notification hit my phone the next morning at 10:15. A digital signature confirming receipt appeared on the screen. My father signed for the parcel. I sat at my desk and visualized the scene unfolding in their kitchen. I pictured Gary slicing open the envelope. I imagined Brenda standing over his shoulder, expecting a tearful letter of surrender from their discarded daughter. Instead, they pull out the county records. They see the neon yellow highlight illuminating their financial doom. They read the 2 words on the sticky note. That would be the exact moment the illusion shatters. The second they realized they gave up their only lifeline to protect a daughter who was about to drag them into poverty. They thought they were punishing me by cutting me out. In reality, they legally shielded me from their upcoming bankruptcy. The weapon they forged to break my spirit provided my ultimate salvation. My phone did not ring that day. The family group chat remained dead silent. The silence was not born from anger or pride. It was the silence of pure, suffocating panic. The foreclosure clock was ticking loudly in their ears. The bank was coming for the colonial, and the golden child had no money left to save them. The pressure cooker was sealed, the heat turned up high, and they had nowhere left to run. 3 months slipped away like dry sand through an hourglass. Autumn stripped the leaves from the Boston trees, leaving the branches bare against a slate-gray November sky. During those 90 days, the corporate world slammed its doors shut on my former brother-in-law. The fraud scandal became an open secret within the tech sector. Recruitment firms blacklisted him. Venture capitalists refused to take his calls. The arrogant executive who once bragged about his stock options was now entirely unemployable. Without a steady income, the financial dominoes tumbled, exactly as my wealth manager predicted. The private commercial lender showed zero mercy. They filed the official notice of default. Last week, an automated alert on my professional real estate monitor pinged my desktop. The bank initiated the final foreclosure process on the suburban colonial. The auction date was officially scheduled. My parents were given a strict timeline to vacate the premises. The walls of their imaginary kingdom were finally caving in. I focused on my career. I closed 2 significant acquisitions and earned a substantial year-end bonus. I kept my phone number unchanged, anticipating the eventual explosion, but the silence stretched on. I assumed their pride would force them to move into a cheap rental unit without ever speaking to me again. I underestimated their desperation. A freezing rain battered the city streets on a dark Tuesday evening. I wrapped a thick wool trench coat tightly around my waist, grabbed an umbrella, and headed down to the ground floor. I planned to walk 2 blocks to a quiet Italian restaurant for a solo dinner. The glass doors of my high-rise hissed open, letting in a blast of icy wind. A figure stood huddled near the edge of the valet driveway, shivering under a flickering street lamp. The man wore a thin, water-resistant jacket that offered no real protection against the November downpour. His gray hair clung flat against his skull. He held a soggy newspaper over his head in a futile attempt to stay dry. It was Gary, the man who spent my childhood demanding perfection. The patriarch who tried to force me into committing corporate perjury was standing on the wet pavement, looking like a discarded beggar. I stopped under the covered awning of my building. I did not rush out into the rain to offer him my umbrella. I stood in the dry, warm light of the lobby entrance and watched him notice me. He dropped the ruined newspaper. He stumbled forward, splashing through a deep puddle near the curb. His usual, intimidating posture was entirely gone. His shoulders slumped and his chest heaved with heavy, ragged breaths. He stopped a few feet away from the awning, remaining in the harsh rain. He looked up at me. His face was pale, lined with deep exhaustion and profound defeat. He did not bark an order. He did not issue a threat. His voice cracked a pathetic, broken sound that barely carried over the noise of the passing traffic. He used my childhood nickname, a name he had not spoken in over a decade. He said they were out of time. He explained that the bank refused all negotiation attempts. The foreclosure auction was set for next Friday. The sheriff would arrive to change the locks and physically remove their belongings from the property. He trembled, whether from the freezing temperature or the sheer humiliation of the moment, I could not tell. He admitted that Tyler was broke and facing an impending indictment. Brittany was drowning in credit card debt. There was no secret rescue fund. There were no rich friends willing to front the cash. Then he laid out his desperate proposal. He begged me to purchase the colonial. He knew about my recent bonus and my strong credit score. He calculated that I could easily secure a mortgage or pay cash to satisfy the commercial lien before the auction date. He pleaded with me to transfer the deed into my name, clear the debt, and allow him and Brenda to remain in the house. He actually asked me to let them live there rent-free for the rest of their lives. He clasped his hands together, rain dripping from his knuckles. He invoked the sacred rule he taught me as a child. He said, "Family takes care of family." He told me that a daughter could not let her elderly parents freeze on the streets. He tried to appeal to my sense of morality, weaponizing societal expectations to secure his own survival. He cried, real, heavy tears mixed with the rain streaming down his cheeks. He begged for mercy. I stood motionless under the awning. I looked at the man crying on the wet concrete. A sudden, sharp memory flashed through my mind. I remembered being a teenager, standing in our kitchen, holding a rejection letter from my dream university because I could not afford the tuition deposit. I remembered crying while Gary drank his morning coffee. He had smirked at my tears, told me the world was a tough place, and instructed me to figure it out on my own. Now the roles were reversed. The universe possessed a brilliant sense of irony. A small, lingering whisper of guilt tried to surface in my mind. Society programs us to revere our parents. Television shows and movies preach endless forgiveness. The culture dictates that holding a grudge against your creators is a character flaw. For a brief second, the heavy weight of that programming pushed against my ribcage. I possessed the financial liquidity to end his suffering with a single wire transfer. I could write a check, stop the auction, and buy the ultimate moral high ground. I could become the savior they never deserved. I stared into his desperate eyes. I analyzed the situation using the same clinical logic I applied to failing corporations. Rescuing them would not heal the past. It would only validate their toxic behavior. Paying off their debt would send a clear message that their cruelty carried no real consequences. It would prove that no matter how terribly they treated me, they could always use my bank account as a safety net. I realized that the tears he shed were not tears of remorse. He was not apologizing for throwing me out of his life. He was not sorry for enabling a thief. He was only crying because he was facing accountability for the very first time. I tightened the belt of my wool coat. I stepped closer to the edge of the awnings, staying just out of the reach of the rain. I told him he should come inside the lobby so we could review the math. He nodded eagerly, a spark of false hope lighting up his wet face. He thought his tears had worked. He believed I was opening my wallet to save his kingdom. He had no idea I was about to show him the exact price of his supposed love, calculated down to the final cent. I gestured toward the revolving glass doors of my building. Gary hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping out of the freezing downpour. He crossed the threshold, his soaked sneakers squeaking loudly against the pristine marble flooring of the residential lobby. He dripped icy water onto the hand-woven rugs, leaving a messy trail that immediately caught the attention of the night concierge. The physical contrast between his disheveled state and the opulent surroundings was stark. He looked around the vast space, taking in the towering modern art installations and the polished brass fixtures. His eyes gravitated toward the private elevator banks. He took a hopeful step in that direction, clearly expecting an invitation to my penthouse where he could sit on a soft sofa, drink warm tea, and play the role of a desperate father seeking refuge. I stepped directly into his path, blocking his route to the elevators. I directed him toward a small, semi-private seating area situated near a decorative gas fireplace on the ground floor. I told him we would conduct our business right there. He frowned, his jaw tightening slightly. The subtle rejection stung his pride, but his lack of leverage forced him to comply. He sank into a deep leather armchair, shivering as the air conditioning hit his damp clothes. I sat on the opposite sofa. I had grabbed my oversized leather work tote on my way down to dinner, a habit formed from years of corporate conditioning. I unzipped the main compartment. I did not pull out a checkbook. I did not retrieve a handkerchief for his tears. I pulled out my silver laptop. Gary wiped a droplet of water from his nose. He stared at the aluminum device resting on my knees, thoroughly confused. He came here expecting a highly emotional negotiation. He prepared a script designed to manipulate my empathy, utilizing tears and nostalgic pleas about preserving our family legacy. He did not anticipate a digital presentation. I opened the lid. The bright glow of the screen illuminated the dark leather furniture between us. I bypassed my work files and opened a personal folder I created years ago. I launched a meticulous, password-protected spreadsheet. I looked across the low coffee table. I informed Gary that before we discussed purchasing real estate or paying off commercial bank liens, we needed to balance an existing ledger. I told him I run audits for a living, and it was time to audit my role as a daughter. I turned the laptop around and pushed it across the smooth wooden surface until it sat directly under his chin. The document contained hundreds of individual rows. I designed the columns with clinical precision. Date of transaction, category of crisis, beneficiary name, exact dollar amount. I leaned forward, pointing to a cluster of entries from 5 years ago. I read the figures aloud to ensure he understood the gravity of the data. I reminded him about the winter his furnace broke. He called me in a panic, claiming he and my mother were freezing because their savings were tied up in bad investments. I paid the HVAC company $7,000 for a brand new heating system. I pointed to a row from 3 years prior. Brittany wrecked her sedan. Her insurance lapsed because she spent the premium money on designer shoes. I paid $4,000 to the auto body shop to keep her out of legal trouble. I scrolled down the screen, exposing line after line of hidden subsidies. I cataloged the cosmetic dental surgery my mother demanded because her insurance refused to cover premium porcelain crowns. I highlighted the overdue property tax bills I quietly settled in 2021 to stop the county from garnishing their wages. I even documented the emergency veterinary visits for a purebred dog they eventually gave away because it required too much walking. Every single time they claimed destitution, every time they swore they had nowhere else to turn, I opened my bank account and quietly solved the crisis. I navigated to the very bottom of the document. A bold red number anchored the final column. $85,420. Gary stared at the screen. The flickering flames from the gas fireplace reflected in his widened eyes. He swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling in rapid succession. He tried to speak, but the sheer volume of his own financial parasitism silenced him. He had spent his entire life treating me like a cold, ungrateful child, conveniently forgetting that I was the unseen engine keeping his household running. I kept my voice devoid of any warmth. I told him that the number on the screen represented the exact purchase price of his affection. I explained that for a decade I operated under the tragic delusion that if I just spent enough money, if I solved enough problems, he would eventually respect me. I bought their peace. I funded their comfort. Then I delivered the final verdict. I informed him that my charity budget permanently expired the moment he pressed the like button on a text message declaring I would make his party stink. I stated clearly that I would not pay a single cent toward his defaulted commercial loan. I would not bid on his house at the upcoming foreclosure auction. The silent wallet was officially closed. The sadness vanished from his face. The pathetic, shivering old man routine evaporated the moment he realized the tears failed to yield a financial return. His posture stiffened. The familiar, arrogant patriarch returned to the surface. He gripped the armrests of the leather chair, leaning forward with a dark scowl. He abandoned his pleas and resorted to bitter entitlement. He gestured wildly at the luxurious lobby surrounding us. He noted the expensive artwork and the marble floors. He growled that I was hoarding millions of dollars while my own blood relatives faced the prospect of sleeping in a gutter. He accused me of being a sociopath, lacking basic human decency. He argued that writing a check to save the colonial would not even dent my net worth. He demanded to know how I could sleep at night, knowing I possessed the power to rescue my family and actively chose to watch them drown. I closed the laptop with a decisive snap, cutting off the glow of the screen. I looked him dead in the eye. I told him my wealth belongs solely to me. I built my career while he mocked my ambitions. I secured my future while he gambled his retirement on a fraudulent tech executive. I reminded him that he chose to guarantee Tyler's luxury lifestyle, and now he must pay the bill. I reached into the side pocket of my tote bag. I anticipated this encounter the moment the foreclosure notice hit the public registry. I pulled out a stapled packet of printer paper. I tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed right next to his wet hands. I explained that the packet contained a comprehensive list of affordable senior housing complexes, subsidized apartments, and low-income relocation programs operated by the state of Massachusetts. I told him to call the numbers during regular business hours, as the waiting lists were notoriously long. I stood up, slid my laptop into my bag, and turned my back on him. I walked across the lobby, pushed through the revolving doors, and stepped back out into the freezing November rain. I left him sitting there, clutching a packet of low-income housing brochures, surrounded by wealth he could never touch. I walked 2 blocks and sat alone in the quiet Italian restaurant, watching the rain streak the window pane next to my table. A deep sense of peace settled over my shoulders. Cutting off the patriarch severed the final chain binding me to my toxic history. But my analytical mind recognized the impending chain reaction. Gary and Brenda were now completely exposed, their financial ruin guaranteed. They had no resources left to shield their golden child. Brittany was about to face the harsh reality of poverty without a scapegoat to blame. And a narcissist stripped of her lifestyle, her husband's income, and her parents' protection would inevitably seek a target to destroy. The war with my parents was over, but the final desperate strike from my sister was just beginning. The weekend passed with a heavy quiet. I spent my Sunday morning in my kitchen grinding fresh coffee beans and watching the morning news. I felt a strange sense of anticipation. Refusing to rescue my father meant the blast wave of their financial collapse was finally hitting their front door. The insulation was gone. The bank would seize the property by Friday. I knew the stress of packing their entire lives into cardboard boxes would fracture their fragile dynamic. I walked over to my kitchen island and tapped the screen of my personal tablet. A new notification sat in my inbox. The sender was my sister. The subject line was typed entirely in capital letters. It demanded my immediate attention regarding a legal emergency. I tapped the message open. I did not find an apology. I did not find a desperate plea for reconciliation. I found a frantic, manic manifesto. Brittany wrote a wall of text that ignored all standard grammar rules. The paragraphs bled together, fueled by raw panic and venom. She painted a vivid picture of the destruction happening inside the suburban house. The parents were frantically boxing up 30 years of possessions. The foreclosure auction loomed over them like a dark cloud. But instead of helping her parents pack, Brittany used the email to launch a vicious attack against them. She detailed a screaming match that took place in their living room the night before. She wrote that Gary and Brenda were completely useless. She blamed them for failing to protect her from this disaster. My parents literally signed away the deed to their only home to sponsor her husband, yet my sister viewed their impending homelessness as a personal insult to her own comfort. She complained that they did not hire a better defense team for Tyler. She complained that they were crying too much and ruining her mood. She called our mother weak and called our father a failure. The sheer level of entitlement jumped off the screen. For her entire life, Brittany was shielded from consequences. Gary and Brenda built a protective bubble around her, feeding her ego and teaching her that the universe existed to serve her needs. They created a monster. Now the monster was hungry, and the creators had no food left to offer. The email shifted focus. Brittany explained the reality of her marriage. Tyler was facing a potential federal indictment. His assets were frozen, his credit was destroyed. Bankruptcy was the only guarantee in his future. The moment the luxury cars were repossessed and the country club membership was revoked, her wedding vows evaporated. She stated she refused to be shackled to a broke felon. She declared her intention to file for an immediate divorce. She cared nothing for the man she married. She only mourned the loss of his checking account. Then came the demand. She did not ask for a favor. She issued a direct order. She stated that she needed to retain a high-powered divorce attorney to secure whatever hidden assets Tyler might still possess. She demanded I wire $20,000 to cover the legal retainer by Monday morning. Her justification for this extortion was a masterpiece of twisted logic. She wrote that since my audit caused the financial freeze, I was personally responsible for financing her exit strategy. She claimed it was my duty to repair the damage I inflicted on her life. She warned me that if I did not send the funds, she would end up living in a cheap apartment and that tragedy would be entirely my fault. I read the entire email twice. I sat on my bar stool and took a sip of my dark roast coffee. A year ago, a message like that would have triggered a severe anxiety attack. I would have felt the crushing pressure of their expectations. I would have searched for a way to fix the problem just to make the screaming stop. Today I felt nothing but a profound, chilling detachment. I looked at the digital text and saw the exact moment the toxic family system imploded. Every dysfunctional family relies on a designated shock absorber. Someone must play the role of the scapegoat. For 3 decades I served that purpose. Whenever Gary felt inadequate, he criticized my choices. Whenever Brenda felt anxious, she projected her insecurities onto my life. Whenever Brittany failed, they all blamed me for not supporting her enough. I was the emotional dumping ground that kept their fragile relationships intact. By walking away, I removed the shock absorber. I closed the landfill. The toxic energy did not magically disappear. It simply bounced off my closed door and ricocheted right back into their faces. Without me there to absorb the blame, they had no one left to attack but each other. Gary was trapped in a house full of moving boxes with a wife who realized his financial prowess was a lie. Brenda was trapped with a husband who lost their retirement. And they were both trapped with a spoiled, ungrateful daughter who blamed them for her husband being a criminal. They were locked in a cage of their own making. The money was gone. The prestige was gone. All that remained was the ugly truth of who they really were. The narrative became crystal clear in my mind. The true consequence for their behavior was not the foreclosure. The real punishment was that they were forced to live with each other. They spent years cultivating an environment of greed and superficial loyalty. They worshipped status and ignored basic decency. Now the bill was due. They were tearing each other apart because they lacked the emotional maturity to look in a mirror and accept responsibility. I did not type a single word in response. I did not explain why her demand was ridiculous. Any reply would just give her the attention she desperately craved. It would provide her with a target. I refused to be her target ever again. I swiped left on the screen. I dragged the frantic email into the trash folder and emptied the bin. The digital record vanished, leaving my inbox clean and organized. I set the tablet down and looked out the window. The morning sun reflected off the harbor, casting a warm glow over the city skyline. I felt an incredible sense of freedom. I survived the grooming. I survived the extortion. I survived the guilt trips. I built a fortress of independence, and their arrows could no longer penetrate the walls. But the silence on my end was bound to provoke a dangerous reaction. Narcissists do not handle being ignored well. When a private demand fails, they seek a public audience. They need validation to survive. If Brittany could not bully me into paying for her divorce, and Gary could not shame me into buying his house, they would need a new strategy to regain control. Brenda would not accept defeat gracefully. She thrived on her reputation in the community. She needed her friends and extended relatives to view her as a tragic victim rather than an enabling accomplice. If she could not fix the reality of her bank accounts, she would try to fix the optics. She would try to rewrite the history of our family destruction and cast me as the ultimate villain in front of everyone we knew. The private battle was finished, but the public smear campaign was just loading its ammunition. Tuesday morning broke, with a pale, weak sun attempting to pierce the thick layer of clouds over the harbor. I sat at my kitchen island sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea. My smartphone rested on the marble counter. It buzzed, sliding an inch across the smooth stone. The notification displayed a text from my Aunt Helen. She lived in Ohio and rarely spoke to our branch of the family, outside of exchanging generic holiday cards. I unlocked the screen and read her message. She asked how I could sleep at night after throwing my elderly parents onto the street. She called me a disgrace to the family name. Before I could process her accusation, another text arrived. This one came from my cousin Mark. He told me I was a heartless shark and warned me that karma always collects its debts. I opened my social media application. The algorithm immediately pushed a lengthy post to the top of my feed. The author was Brenda. She had published a public status update late Monday night, tagging 24 extended relatives, church choir members, and neighborhood friends. She attached a grainy black and white photograph of the suburban colonial, framing the image to look like a tragic historical artifact. Her written narrative was a masterclass in fiction. She claimed I harbored a deep, unnatural jealousy toward my sister's perfect marriage. She spun a fabricated tale, stating I used an unethical corporate loophole at my private equity firm to terminate Tyler stealing his hard-earned career just to ruin his life. The most dangerous lie sat in the third paragraph. She wrote that I manipulated the real estate market, bought the deed to their home in secret, and initiated a cruel eviction process to feed my own greed. She concluded the post by asking her community for prayers, stating she and Gary were packing their belongings into trash bags because their cruel, sociopathic daughter decided to render them homeless right before the winter season. The comment section resembled an angry mob carrying digital pitchforks. Women from her Sunday school group offered their guest bedrooms. Old high school friends called me a monster. The community rallied around the weeping matriarch, validating her victimhood and feeding her narcissism. Brenda achieved her goal. She shifted the focus away from her own financial incompetence and directed the public outrage squarely onto my shoulders. She needed a villain to hide the shame of losing her house to a commercial bank over a fraudulent son-in-law. I read the comments. I did not type a defense. I did not engage in a petty online argument. Arguing with a manipulator in front of an audience only gives their lies oxygen. I locked my phone, finished my tea, and walked out the door to catch my ride to the financial district. I arrived at my corporate headquarters and went straight to the top floor. I bypassed my own office suite and walked down the hallway to the legal department. I knocked on the heavy oak door belonging to Richard, our senior litigation partner. He instructed me to enter. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk and handed him my unlocked phone. I asked him to read the social media post. Richard adjusted his reading glasses. He scanned the text. His expression hardened into a severe professional scowl. Brenda made a critical tactical error. In her rush to paint me as a villain, she explicitly accused me of utilizing illegal corporate loopholes at our specific firm to terminate a tech executive. She crossed the line from personal family drama into corporate defamation. She attached my employer's reputation to her suburban smear campaign. Richard handed the phone back to me. He asked how I wanted to handle the situation. I told him I wanted to execute a lethal strike of truth. We spent the next hour drafting a formal cease and desist order. Richard utilized the heavy, intimidating letterhead of our global law firm. The language was sterile, sharp, and terrifying. The document demanded the immediate deletion of the defamatory social media post. It threatened a devastating civil lawsuit for libel, promising to seek punitive damages that would garnish any future wages or retirement distributions my parents might ever receive. But a threat alone was insufficient. I needed to dismantle her false narrative permanently. I instructed Richard to include exhibits. We attached Exhibit A. It was a printed copy of the unsealed federal indictment filed against Tyler. The document outlined his offshore shell companies, the phantom software invoices, and the exact dollar amount he embezzled from his investors. We attached Exhibit B. It was a certified copy of the commercial bank lien placed on the suburban Colonial. The public record clearly displayed the name of the predatory private lender initiating the foreclosure. It highlighted the original loan amount. Most importantly, it featured the clear, undeniable signatures of Gary and Brenda Wright, acting as unconditional personal guarantors for the thief. The packet proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had nothing to do with their eviction. It proved they lost their house because they sponsored a federal criminal. I took the finished legal packets down to the corporate shipping center. I did not just address a single envelope to Brenda. Sending the truth solely to a liar accomplishes nothing. A liar will just burn the evidence and continue telling the lie. The truth requires a willing audience. I printed 4 identical packets. I sent the first one to Aunt Helen in Ohio. I sent the second one to Cousin Mark. I addressed the third one to the head of Brenda's church committee, a woman who commented twice on the Facebook post, offering her prayers. I sent the final packet to my mother. I utilized priority overnight shipping for all 4 destinations. Wednesday afternoon arrived, with a crisp breeze rattling the windows of my office. The courier tracking system confirmed all 4 packages were successfully delivered. The family gossip network operated with a terrifying efficiency. It moved faster than any fiber optic cable. Aunt Helen opened her thick envelope. She read the sterile legal language. She flipped to the attached exhibits. She saw the federal indictment bearing the seal of the United States government. She saw the commercial loan default notice proving Gary gambled his own house on a criminal venture. The fabricated story collapsed in real time. By 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Aunt Helen. Her tone shifted from self-righteous anger to profound embarrassment. She apologized for her previous words. She admitted she had no idea Tyler was facing prison time. She confessed she was horrified that Gary and Brenda would lie to the entire family just to cover up a felony. 10 minutes later, Cousin Mark sent a similar message, expressing his shock at the court documents. I did not reply to either of them. They were quick to assume the worst about me without asking a single question. Their apologies were meaningless. I left their messages unread. I checked my social media feed. Brenda's tragic black and white post was gone. The weeping narrative, the fake eviction, claims, the hundreds of supportive comments vanished into the digital void. She deleted the entire thread the moment her church committee leader called her to ask about the federal indictment. The community reaction was swift and unforgiving. People despise being manipulated into offering sympathy to a liar. The women from her Sunday school group stopped calling. The neighbors who offered to help them pack suddenly found themselves too busy. The extended relatives who previously rallied to her defense went silent, disgusted by the sheer audacity of her deception. Brenda tried to weaponize her social circle to destroy my reputation. Instead, she handed me the exact tools I needed to expose her true nature. She isolated herself completely. She lost her house. She lost her golden child's future, and now she lost her entire support system. She was standing on a burning bridge with nowhere to run. The calendar turned to Friday. The morning of the sheriff's auction arrived. The legal deadline to vacate the premises expired at noon. I sat at my desk, reviewing a new acquisition portfolio, enjoying the quiet rhythm of a normal workday. The smear campaign was a distant memory. I felt an undeniable sense of victory. Then my desk phone lit up. The caller ID displayed the main reception desk downstairs. The receptionist informed me that a frantic woman was standing in the lobby, demanding to speak with me. The woman refused to leave and was currently crying near the security turnstiles. The final boundary was under attack. I held the plastic receiver tightly against my ear. The receptionist on the ground floor sounded genuinely unnerved. She spoke in a hushed, rushed tone, explaining that an older woman was blocking the main security turnstiles. The visitor lacked an appointment, but demanded immediate access to the executive suites. She was causing a scene, weeping loudly and clutching the edge of the marble desk, claiming a catastrophic family emergency. I asked the receptionist for a physical description. She described a frantic woman wearing a damp trench coat, clutching a crumpled tissue with mascara running down her cheeks. It was Brenda. She had traveled into the city on the morning of her own eviction, choosing to launch a final ambush rather than pack her belongings. I did not hesitate. I gave a firm, clear directive. I instructed the front desk to deny her a visitor badge. I authorized the immediate use of building guards to escort the trespasser out the front doors and onto the public sidewalk. I told the receptionist that, if the woman refused to leave the premises, she should dial the police. I placed the receiver back onto the console. I did not rush down to the lobby. I did not feel the urge to offer a final piece of advice or witness her humiliation. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and picked up my pen. The chaos remained exactly where it belonged, firmly locked behind reinforced glass and security protocols far away from my peace of mind. 3 minutes later, my personal smartphone illuminated on the glass surface of my desk. An incoming call glowed on the screen. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I did not swipe to answer. I watched the device vibrate against the wood until the call dropped. A moment later, a new voicemail icon appeared. I tapped the screen and pressed the play button. I activated the speakerphone setting, the device down so I could continue reviewing a quarterly balance sheet. Brenda's voice filled my quiet office. Traffic noise and honking horns echoed in the background, confirming she was standing out on the cold pavement. The recording began with heavy, theatrical sobbing. She attempted to weaponize a mother's pain. She begged for a wire transfer. She stated the county sheriff was scheduled to arrive at the house in less than 2 hours. She claimed the moving boxes were stacked in the living room, but they had no money for a security deposit on a rental apartment. She whimpered, saying my father was sitting on the floor holding his chest. Then the tone flipped. The weeping stopped, replaced by a harsh, venomous edge. The guilt trip began. She accused me of abandoning my fundamental duty. She declared that a real daughter would never let her parents suffer such a public disgrace. She brought up the pain of childbirth, the years she spent raising me, and the supposed sacrifices she made to put a roof over my head. She oscillated wildly between a desperate command and a pathetic whimper. She demanded I transfer $400,000 right this second, warning me that God would punish me for turning my back on my own flesh and blood. The manipulation was entirely transparent. It was a textbook performance from a woman who spent decades trading guilt for cash. I listened to the audio for exactly 40 seconds. I did not let the recording finish. I reached out and tapped the trash can icon on the screen. The audio cut off mid-sentence. The file vanished into the digital void. I emptied the deleted items folder immediately, ensuring her voice was permanently erased from my device. I realized the access points were still open. Leaving those channels active was a massive liability. A toxic family system relies on continuous access to their chosen target. They need an open line to project their misery. I decided to sever the lines completely. I unlocked my phone and navigated to the group messaging application. I scrolled down my chat list and located the family thread. The notification badge showed dozens of unread messages from the past few days, likely frantic updates from Brittany complaining about her impending divorce, and my parents panicking about the bank. I did not open the thread to read their misery. I swiped left to expose the settings menu. I tapped the button labeled Leave Conversation. A warning prompt appeared on the screen asking for final confirmation. I tapped Confirm. Next, I selected the option to delete the entire chat history. The digital anchor tying me to 32 years of emotional abuse disappeared in a fraction of a second. There was no final victory speech typed into the text box. There was no dramatic parting insult. True power does not require an announcement. I opened the web browser on my laptop and logged into my mobile carrier account. I clicked through the administrative settings to request a phone number change. The system prompted me to pay a processing fee. I entered my credit card information and submitted the request. Within 5 minutes, the screen refreshed. A brand new string of digits was assigned to my cellular device. The old connection was officially dead. Brenda, Gary, and Brittany would hear a disconnected tone from this moment forward. They lost the ability to call, text, or harass me. Next, I opened my internal corporate portal. I drafted a concise professional memo to the Information Technology Department. I provided the personal email addresses of my parents and my sister. I instructed the server administrators to establish a strict firewall block against those specific contacts. Any incoming correspondence from them would automatically bounce back as undelivered. I finished the purge by contacting my residential property manager. I logged into the tenant portal for my high-rise building. I updated my visitor authorization list. I explicitly banned my relatives by name, adding a note that building security should treat them as hostile trespassers. My private sanctuary was now impenetrable. I set my phone face down on the desk. I looked up at the digital clock mounted on my office wall. It read 11:45. I poured myself a glass of iced water from the crystal pitcher resting on my credenza. I took a slow sip. The minutes ticked forward. 11:50. 11:55. Noon. The deadline passed. Miles away, inside a crowded county courthouse, a legal clerk finalized the paperwork. A gavel struck a wooden block. The commercial bank officially reclaimed the deed to the property. The eviction became a permanent, irreversible reality. The sheriff walked up the driveway, knocked on the front door, and ordered the occupants to leave the premises. I felt a profound physical shift in my body as the clock struck 12. The chronic tension I carried in my neck and shoulders for my entire life dissolved completely. The knot of anxiety that always lived in my stomach unraveled. There was no cinematic screaming match to mark the end of our relationship. There was no tearful goodbye in the pouring rain. There was no grand confrontation where they finally admitted their faults and apologized for their cruelty. I realized those moments only happen in fiction. In real life, closure is incredibly quiet. It is the simple, definitive act of walking away and refusing to look over your shoulder. I packed my briefcase for the weekend. I slid my clean, unconnected phone into my pocket. The deep, cleansing relief washed over me like a warm wave. I excised the tumor. I removed the infection that had poisoned my joy for 3 decades. I walked out of my office, greeted my colleagues with a genuine smile, and headed toward the elevators. I was completely free. The long war was over, but the universe had one final beautiful surprise waiting for me exactly 1 year later. A perfect reward for having the courage to close the door. Exactly 12 months passed since I deactivated that cellular account. The calendar circled back to late August, bringing a crisp edge to the New England mornings. The corporate machinery I set into motion operated flawlessly, rewarding my precision with an unprecedented career milestone. The founding partners at my private equity firm called a mandatory executive board meeting. I walked into the main conference room, expecting to discuss a new logistics acquisition. Instead, the chief executive officer slid a thick, leather-bound contract across the table. He announced that my handling of the fraudulent startup saved the company millions of dollars in federal fines and protected our institutional investors from catastrophic exposure. They offered me a seat at the head table. I signed the partnership agreement right there. I was officially promoted to managing partner. My compensation package tripled, granting me a level of financial security most people only dream about. I did not use my newly acquired wealth to lease a flashy sports car or buy imported designer handbags. I sought a permanent fortress. I drove 3 hours west of the city, deep into the Berkshire Mountains of rural Massachusetts. I toured a historic stone estate situated on 14 acres of pristine, untouched woodland. The property featured a sweeping wraparound porch, a custom-built outdoor kitchen, and complete, impenetrable privacy. The nearest neighbor lived a mile down the road. I purchased the deed in cash. I sat in a quiet real estate office and signed the closing documents using my favorite fountain pen. My name was the only signature on the contract. There were no guarantors required. There was no shared equity. I held the heavy brass keys in my palm, feeling the solid weight of a home built entirely by my own intellect and relentless hard work. While I constructed a peaceful new reality, the justice system dismantled the remnants of my former relatives. I did not need to seek out information regarding their downfall. The corporate compliance sector is a very small world, and the legal updates flowed freely through professional channels. The federal judge presiding over the embezzlement case showed zero leniency toward white-collar crime. Tyler stood in a federal courtroom and received a 36-month sentence in a minimum security correctional facility. The authorities liquidated every single asset he owned to pay restitution to the defrauded investors. The luxury vehicles were auctioned. The expensive watches were seized. He traded his custom-tailored suits for a standard-issue uniform. Without stolen corporate funds to cushion her fall, my sister collided headfirst with a brutal economic reality. Her divorce proceedings yielded absolutely nothing because the marital accounts were completely empty. Brittany could no longer afford her aesthetic. She moved into a tiny, garden-level apartment in a noisy industrial neighborhood. The rent was due on the first of the month, and the former golden child had zero marketable skills. To avoid eviction, she accepted a job standing behind a cash register at a massive retail chain. She spends 40 hours a week wearing a polyester uniform, scanning barcodes and bagging groceries for minimum wage. Her feet ache. Her manicures are ruined. She spends her days serving the exact type of working-class people she spent her entire life mocking. Gary and Brenda faced an equally bleak existence. After the sheriff escorted them out of their suburban colonial, they scrambled to secure basic shelter. Their credit scores were entirely decimated by the commercial loan default. Reputable landlords rejected their rental applications. They eventually managed to sign a lease on a cramped, outdated duplex situated directly adjacent to a noisy interstate highway. The thin walls rattled every time a commercial transport truck drove past. However, the true tragedy for my mother was not the drastic reduction in square footage. It was the absolute destruction of her social currency. The women from her church congregation ignored her phone calls. The neighborhood committee banned her from attending their charity functions. The community shunned them completely. My parents lived in total isolation, trapped in a tiny living room with peeling paint, forced to sit across from each other and dwell on their bitter regrets. They traded a loyal daughter for a criminal son-in-law, and the transaction left them bankrupt in every conceivable way. I did not pity them. I simply let them exist in the bed they made. The Friday before Labor Day arrived. I walked out the French doors of my new kitchen and stepped onto the sprawling stone patio. String lights illuminated the massive backyard, casting a warm, golden glow over the manicured lawn. The smell of smoked brisket and grilled vegetables filled the cool mountain air. I hired a local catering company to manage the food, ensuring I could actually enjoy the evening. Dozens of people filled the outdoor space. My senior corporate colleagues laughed near the custom fire pit. My financial planner shared a drink with my closest friends from the city. This gathering was my chosen family. They were individuals who celebrated my intelligence and respected my firm boundaries. Nobody in this crowd asked me to fund their lifestyle. Nobody expected me to pay for their mistakes or hide their secrets. The atmosphere was completely devoid of tension. There were no snide comments about my career. There were no silent expectations demanding I pull out my credit card. It was just pure, uncomplicated joy. I held a glass of sparkling water and leaned against the cool stone of the retaining wall. I looked out over the dark tree line as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in deep shades of purple and orange. The music played softly in the background, blending with the sound of genuine laughter from my guests. My mind drifted back to the digital notification that ignited this entire journey. I thought about the text message banning me from a backyard because I would ruin the vibe. For a very long time, I operated under the assumption that being uninvited was the ultimate rejection. I believed it was a cruel punishment designed to highlight my lack of worth. Standing here on my own land, surrounded by people who value my presence, I realized that message was never an insult. It was the greatest gift my sister could have ever given me. It was the heavy steel key that unlocked my prison cell. They thought they were pushing me away, but they were actually setting me free. They handed me the exact amount of disrespect required to finally close my wallet and walk out the door. If you are listening to this story, and you are exhausted from carrying the crushing weight of ungrateful relatives, I want you to hear this truth. You do not owe your sanity to people who only view you as a financial resource. Setting a firm boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of pure survival. The culture will tell you to forgive and forget. Society will pressure you to keep the peace at all costs. But peace purchased with your own misery is just extortion disguised as love. You deserve a seat at a table where your presence is valued, not monetized. You deserve to be surrounded by people who protect your peace instead of exploiting your generosity. And if your current circle refuses to offer you that basic level of respect, you possess the power to stand up and walk away. You can build your own table. You can buy your own estate. The price of admission to your life should be mutual respect, and anyone who refuses to pay that toll does not get to cross your bridge. Thank you for tuning in to Grape Vengeance. I hope this story gives you the courage to examine the ledgers in your own life. Remember to subscribe and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of their own worth. Keep your boundaries strong and never apologize for protecting your future.